Hardest part of recognizing abuse is the silence. It's the isolation, the feeling of being assumed that you're overreacting. Let's expose those invisible weapons that abusers use, from financial control to emotional gaslighting. And let's show what science says about devastating impact upon long-term brain injury, leads to PTSD and significant anxiety. Trigger warning at the beginning of this podcast. This is an emotive episode. If you find this subject affects you adversely, then please seek help immediately. There's helplines and resources recorded at the end of this podcast, as well as in the show notes. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience domestic abuse in their lifetimes, yet it remains hidden in plain sight. This isn't just about physical violence, it's about the erosion of self. If you feel like you're walking on eggshells, this episode is your first step to safe ground. Welcome to Peace Unplugged. Today we're going to confront an uncomfortable truth. Domestic abuse is a massive public and mental health crisis. I'm looking beyond the physical aspects to explore some more nuanced kinds of abuse. And most importantly, to look at some evidence-based actions that you can take. Over the years during my employment, I worked with many clients that had these issues. I listened to those people and heard their personal testimonies. So the information I'm providing here does have some background from myself and what I experienced other people tell me. Also, some of the advice I'm giving out on this podcast relates to some of my colleagues that also worked very closely with those clients, mentioning some specific modalities that helped. The hardest part of recognizing abuse is the silence. It's the isolation, the feeling of being assumed that you're overreacting. Let's expose those invisible weapons that abusers use, from financial control to emotional gaslighting. And let's show what science says about the devastating impact upon long-term brain injury, leads to PTSD and significant anxiety. By the end of this episode, you'll be equipped with some clarity, also some scientific insights, and perhaps some solutions for survivors and allies. You see, knowledge is not just power, it's the foundation for safety in these circumstances. So make sure you listen right through to the end. That way you'll hear some key contacts, phone numbers, and resources that you can use. Now, there's something called coercive control. So what's that, I hear you ask? It's a pattern of acts designed to make you feel inferior or dependent. Significantly, it is actually the core of most domestic abuse situations. I'm going to read to you now an example. Pervasive monitoring. A partner installs a tracking app, demands access to your emails, to text messages, dictates who the victim can see. The victim might never have been struck, but lives physically in a state of constant fear and total surrender of autonomy. The control is so constant it becomes background noise, a normalization of terror. Scientific evidence by Evan Stark in Coercive Control confirms this pattern of control is significantly associated with elevated levels of trauma-associated mental health symptoms. That includes complex PTSD and chronic depression, and that can often have a greater long-term impact than the physical violence alone. Recognizing the pattern of the constant monitoring and the deliberate isolation is the first critical action to take against domestic abuse. You see, this abuse is not random. It's calculated. Now let's look at the aspect of gaslighting and psychological erosion. Psychological abuse is the deliberate attempt to destroy the victim's sense of reality and self-worth. The most insidious tool that gets used is gaslighting. Here's another example. The case of memory distortion. The victim clearly recalls a hurtful event or promise, but the abuser insists that never happened. You're being hysterical. So the victim starts secretly writing things down, taking pictures, or questioning their own memory, desperately trying to prove their sanity. This constant invalidation causes deep self-doubt and heightened anxiety. Psychological trauma, particularly chronic emotional abuse, is linked to changes in brain function, especially in the areas related to the hippocampus and emotional regulation. Research on trauma survivors shows that the prolonged stress from gaslighting compromises their ability to trust their own cognitive processes, which is why trauma-informed care and self-compassion are crucial to trauma healing. The counteraction is intellectually simple and revolutionary, but it's also significantly difficult to accept when strong emotions are concerned. Point is, trust yourself. Your feelings are valid, even when those feelings are being disputed by somebody else, meaning the abuser. Feeling of being crazy or suggested that you're crazy is simply a symptom of that abuse. It is not a personal flaw. Next, we'll look at economic abuse. Economic abuse is a silent, powerful form of abuse. It actually affects directly a victim's ability to leave a relationship. That's because it creates financial dependency and effectively entrapment. Here's another example. The case of controlled access and debt. A partner either forbids the victim from working or takes their entire pay, only dispensing small supervised allowances. They may also force the victim to take out high-interest loans in their own name. The victim is effectively financially destitute, lacking independent credit, and has no means of securing housing or transport. That means that leaving that relationship becomes virtually impossible. Specialist domestic abuse organisations like Refuge and Women's Aid highlight that a lack of financial resources is one of the biggest practical barriers to leaving an abuser. So providing secure, independent financial support and literacy training is proven successful intervention in trauma healing for survivors. One of the resources is to seek advice from independent domestic violence advocate, or IDVA. They'll help to safely manage financial documents in your name only. An IDVA will assist and encourage the victim to set up a safety plan, and that includes financial safety. It's a critical part of the larger safety plan. So let's consider children. Are they victims too? Evidence states that where children live in a home with domestic abuse, even without being directly harmed, they are still victims. This exposure is a significant form of adverse childhood experiences, known as ACE. Let's look at a case of hypervigilance in a child. That child learns to monitor the parent's moods, taking on the role of emotional regulator. They become hypervigilant, always waiting for the next explosion. This leads to internalizing symptoms like severe anxiety, depression, difficulty concentrating in school, and compromises the ability to form secure attachments later in life. Let's look at the example of triangulation and manipulation. The abuser uses the child as a tool delivering abusive message to the other parent, spying on them, or forcing the child to take sides. This triangulation forces an emotional conflict that causes severe psychological distress for the child. Research confirms that children exposed to intimate partner violence or abuse have a higher risk of mental health difficulties throughout the rest of their lives. The emotional and neurological impact of witnessing is often as severe as being directly physically abused. This needs specialised support for children, not just the adult survivor. Creating a sense of consistency for the child and safety is absolutely paramount. It needs specialised services like counselling. Helping the child to establish some predictable routines are essential for action against the abuse in the household and to mitigate the long-term effects. We've learned that domestic abuse is a pattern of coercive control that operates across psychological, economic, and physical situations. The most effective action against domestic abuse is one that focuses on survivor safety, self-worth, and survivor empowerment. Never forget, fault lies 100% with the abuser. Next, I'm just going to talk to you about some of the resources that are currently available to help people. One of those is prioritising psychoeducation. That means educating communities and schools about the signs of coercive control, moving beyond a focus on only physical violence to recognise the insidious patterns of emotional and economic abuse. Ensuring economic independence. There's providing access to legal aid, emergency funds, and also some financial literacy training. This is designed to break the economic cycle of abuse and allow survivors to achieve genuine long-term independence. There's investing in trauma-informed advocacy. That's increased funds to IDVAs. That's independent domestic violence advocates. Also, specialist trauma healing services to provide comprehensive, immediate and ongoing support for adult and child survivors. There's empowering bystanders, implementing training for family, friends, co-workers and professionals on how to notice the subtle signs of abuse and offer safe, non-judgmental and practical support without forcing the survivor to leave. There's focusing on perpetrator accountability, investing in evidence-based perpetrator behaviour change programs and hold offenders accountable through effective legal and justice system responses to prevent re-victimisation. If anything in this podcast resonates with your experience, either for yourself or someone that you know, please know that you're not alone. There are services out there to help. You deserve peace and safety. Please take note of those helplines I'm revealing at the end of this podcast. This is the moment for action against domestic abuse. As promised, here are some major domestic abuse helplines and websites from the United States and also the UK. These offer confidential 24/7 support. If you're in immediate danger, please call emergency services. That's 999 in the UK or 911 in the United States. So I'm going to start with the United States. National Domestic Violence Helplines. Hotline call 1-800-799-7233. Safe, free, confidential support, justice intervention and referrals 24/7. You can text START to 88788 or go on the chat at hotline.org. Strong Hearts Native Helpline, call 1-844-762-8483. That's confidential 24/7 culturally appropriate domestic violence and dating violence helpline for Native Americans and Alaska Natives. There's the National Teen Dating Abuse Helpline. Love is Respect. Call 1-866-331-9474. Support for young people aged 13 to 26 experiencing dating abuse. Text Love Is to 22522. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, NCADV website, ncadv.org. That provides information on advocacy, policy and resources. Please note that that's primarily advocacy and not a direct crisis line. Now let's look at some UK resources. National Domestic Abuse Helplines run by Refuge. Call 0808 2000 247. That's a free phone, 24-hour-a-day, free, confidential, non-judgmental support and information for women experiencing domestic abuse and concerned others. There's live chat via the website, nationaldahelpline.org. There's the Men's Advice Line run by Respect called 0808 8010 327. That's a confidential helpline for all men experiencing domestic abuse by a current or ex-partner. The website is mensadviceline.org.uk. There is Gallup. That is LGBTQ domestic abuse helpline. Call 0800 999 5428. That's emotional and practical support for LGBTQ plus people experiencing abuse and violence. You can email help@gallup.org.uk. There's the Women's Aid website, womensaid.org.uk. This provides a wide range of resources, including the Survivor's Handbook, and runs a supportive community forum. There is the Respect phone line, call 0808 802 4040. That is confidential advice for perpetrators who are worried about their abusive behaviour and want to change. I'm now just going to refer to some safety information regarding internet use. Be aware that your internet use can be monitored. If that is the case, consider using a safe computer, for instance at the library or a friend's house or at work if you are allowed to do so. Significantly, always remember to clear your browser data when you've finished making inquiries. And it also suggests that you use the safety exit button provided on most helpline websites. So as I've stated above, many helplines offer non-phone contact methods like text, live chat, or email for people who cannot safely speak aloud. There is the confidentiality aspect. All national helplines provide free, confidential support. They won't tell you what to do, but they'll help you explore options and create a safety plan. So these are just a few of the many help resources available at this time of recording. So as a reminder, I encourage you to seek up-to-date information. Thanks again for listening to Peace Unplugged. I'm wishing you peace and safety and tranquility. Bye for now.